Hello everyone, and welcome to today's video. We're going to do something a little bit different. Talked about it for a little bit, been hyping it up, and today we're going to do a movie review. Yay, get excited, clap those little tentacles. The movie we're going to review today is X. It came out this year, and it's directed by T. West, and it stars a couple people. So top billing right now is Mia Goth, Jenna Ortega, Brittany Snow, Kid Cudi, and there's a lot of others. And it was released by A24, which is a company that, if you like horror, I know you know about. So just to be fair to anybody who hasn't seen this yet, we're going to avoid all the spoilers, at least for this initial video. We might put out a video that has some spoilers later on, but for this one, we're going to avoid it. We're just going to talk about some of my thoughts and get going. So without further ado, X takes place in 1979, and it follows a group of coworkers and friends, probably a little bit of both, I guess, that decide they want to make a porno. And they want it to be better than Debbie Does Dallas. This is going to be their ticket out. It's going to be what makes them famous, makes them rich, and gives them all the lifestyle that they want. But during this filming, stuff gets really bloody, really deadly, and takes some pretty uncomfortable and grotesque turns. So, I mean, right off the bat, the film does an amazing job of taking you into 1979. And anyone who's seen older movies knows that there's a very, very specific look and a very specific feel that happens when you record on actual film. There's little pops in it. There's noise in the image. It's almost at this point iconic. With IMAX and digital recordings, we don't really get that anymore. And the very first shot of this movie actually has a pretty substantial claustrophobic feel to it. And it seems like as you're watching it that the movie is going to be shot in a 4:3 aspect ratio. You know, think of old TVs back from the 90s and what those look like. It's super small on a theater screen. And you're like, wow, this is different. But it's not really until that camera starts to move forward that you realize, all right, the whole screen's being used, but I'm inside a barn, and that the movie isn't actually in 4:3. It's hard to explain, especially when there's no way for me to show it, but that type of cinematography, that type of intro, it really just pulled me into the movie, and it made me start to question right off the bat if what I was actually going to see was what was happening, or if there'd be misdirection throughout it. And there is, to a certain extent, throughout the movie. So T. West decided that for this movie, topics that people generally find uncomfortable are going to take front and center. And I think he does a fantastic job, a really masterful job at making you as a viewer feel uncomfortable throughout it. I mean, literally, it's throughout the whole thing. It's the way near the beginning of the movie, you see women in what I'm going to just say as the sex industry being manipulated, being hooked on cocaine and other drugs. And it's highly, highly inferred that the owner of the strip club where this main character works is the one that's supplying it to her, which, by the way, this stripper is dating the owner of the establishment. And it's set up, hey, this guy left his wife to get with this woman who has this X factor, which you can see ties back to the name. But it really is just a situation where in 79, when this was filmed, all the way through to some of the more spoilery elements that are later in the film, there's a lot to do with sex. There's a lot to do with topics that people find uncomfortable, especially in the second half of this movie. There's some things that we can't talk about because they're spoilers, but the topic of them generally makes people really, really uncomfortable. And it's topics that people avoid. And it just proves that this movie really is designed to be a situation where it's like, what the hell did I just see? And I'm thinking back to it. The beginning half of this movie has no horror in it, and that's fine. But it's the atmosphere that it sets up about this farmhouse that's really powerful. It's one of those instances where you know for a fact that something bad's going to happen, and you know it's going to be really bad, but you don't know when it's going to happen or in what context. And yeah, there is a ton of sex and nudity in that first half as this group starts to make this very cinematically pleasing porno, and it has some great humor in it. But the entire time that you're watching it, there's this unsettling overtone that builds and builds and escalates until everything kind of culminates into this super shit show, bloody slasher film. To the point where I actually was kind of sitting there in the theater like, I can't believe they just did that. And it is a radical shift. You can tell it's happening. If you've seen the trailer, you kind of have a vibe for what's going to happen as it starts to. But the trailer doesn't do that scene justice. Whatever you think is going to happen, they take it up to a 10, which is another theme throughout the whole second half of this movie. I think that type of split is both the movie's biggest strength and probably its biggest weakness. It's almost like the director T. West had two movies in his head. The first is, how do we make a classy porno? And the second is more traditional horror, tons of blood, gruesome deaths. It's very distinct. It's going to polarize people. But polarizing people is nothing new to A24, who's pretty much known at this point for taking something that's basic or cliche premise-wise and turning it into something that's more nebulous and philosophical. I did a lot of reading before I recorded this video about the difference between horror and elevated horror. But this film takes that classic trope of sex-driven young adults and how they get killed off and puts a spin on it. And while I can't really say that I didn't expect it to happen, I can say that I didn't fully understand it, and I was surprised at how it unfolded. So overall, I think the movie just did a fantastic job. But taking a step back towards that elevated horror piece just for a second, I really do think that this film did a great job of showing hypocrisy in the porno industry, specifically between two characters who are dating, where one wants to be in this porno and the other one doesn't want her to be, and that tie into loss of innocence all throughout the first half. And there are some really great parallels between different characters, which you see unfolding both visually and through plot. The second half of the movie loses a lot of that nuance. And it seemed to me like it went from making one statement into making a totally different statement. And I could just say, I really have no idea what some of those connections and parallels meant in the way that they were offered. And I feel like I'm going to need to watch it again to really understand it. But overall, I think this movie did exactly what I was hoping it would do. It delivered on that promise of shit's going to get bloody, people are going to die. And it did it with some of the best practical effects that I've seen in a long time. And I honestly can't give enough credit to the makeup department and the effects department. I think they did a fantastic job. That being said, I did have some issues with the movie. There are some visual moments of exposition. So don't think monologuing, don't think plot directly. Think of it done visually. I didn't feel like some of it answered questions. I felt like some of it asked more questions than it answered. And that's okay. Things don't really have to be answered. A movie doesn't have to give you all of the details and all of the answers for it to be good, which I think is kind of what made this fun. But some of the sequences were a little bit over the top, which is what this movie is going for. It's about people filming a porno and then a slasher flick. But knowing at the very end of the movie, which it's not really a spoiler, so don't worry, there's a whole sequel filmed for this movie that is really a prequel. And it's amazing to see, hey, there's more to this. There's more to this story, this universe, whether it's going to be a franchise or just a one-off, I don't know. But I think, again, if you know A24 and you've watched other movies from them, you kind of know what to expect here. Overall, I enjoyed it. I got creeped out. I got my horror kick from it. I didn't know how things would happen, even if I knew what was coming. I strongly think that if you like horror and that you want something a little bit outside of the ordinary, that you're really going to like this movie. So I think if I had to give it a final rating, I would give it 8 out of 10 tacos. There were just a few things I think that brought it down a little bit, but hey, that's just my opinion. Overall, really well done from all of the actors in it, and I really enjoyed it. If you decide to go see it, fair warning, it is a hard R. Obviously, with the plot and what happens, it needs to be a hard R for this to work. But if you like horror, I think you'll enjoy it. There'll be more reviews in the future. I don't know what they'll look like, might change this format up, might keep it, but I really, really appreciate everybody for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.